Chapter 1. The Arithmetic of Still Being Here. I want to tell you the worst thing about Commorragh. Not the cages. You expect the cages, not the sounds. And there are sounds here that I could describe to you in precise clinical detail, and you still would not understand what they do to a person over time, so I won't. Because the sounds are not the worst thing. Not the hunger, not the dark, not the specific quality of fear that becomes, after long enough, so familiar that you stop registering it as fear and start registering it as weather. All of that is real. All of that is present. None of it is the worst thing. The worst thing is this. I know the name of the servant who brings my water. Her name is Isin. She prefers the color blue, a specific blue, the dark arterial shade that appears in the trim of a particular Cabal's armor, and she has 3 small things in her quarters that are that color, and she has never told me this directly, but I know it because I have been here long enough to notice things, and I have not yet lost the habit of noticing. I know that she moves differently on the days when Visereth is in residence than on the days when she is not. I know that when she sets the tray down without looking at me, something has gone wrong in whatever passes for her life. I know this the way you know things about a colleague, the way you know the habits of people you have spent years beside. I want you to hold that. I want you to hold what it means that I use the word colleague. I want you to hold what it means that I know the name of the person who brings my water and her preferences and the shape of her moods. I want you to hold what it means that there is a me in this sentence at all. A person who has been here long enough to accumulate this kind of knowledge, who has had the time and the proximity and the continued existence required to learn someone's name and her favorite color, and what her posture tells you about the quality of her day. I have been in Commorragh for what I estimate to be 6 years. I stopped trusting my estimates in year 3. My name is Aldric Voss. Before you ask, and you will not ask, because you are not here, because I am speaking into something that might not be listening. But before you ask, yes, I remember it. My name. I remember it clearly, without effort, the way you remember the shape of your own hands. Some things the years take and some things they don't, and names, I have found, are the last to go. Names are load-bearing. The self builds everything else on top of them. When you lose the name, you lose the architecture, and the architecture, once gone, does not come back in any form you would recognize. I have not lost the architecture. That is either the best thing about my situation or the worst thing, and I have not yet determined which. I was a mid-ranking scribe in the Administratum's agricultural division, stationed on Pellas 4 in the Mausolée subsector. My function, my entire professional function, the thing I did with the majority of my waking hours for 11 years, was the cataloguing of discrepancies, supply manifests that did not match arrival records, yield projections that diverged from actual output, tithe calculations that contained the kind of quiet errors that accumulate in any large system when people are tired or overworked or simply human, and that, if left unaddressed, produce shortfalls that cascade outward and eventually become famines on worlds that never knew there was a problem until the problem had their name. I was good at it. I was not brilliant. I was not promoted beyond the rank my competence warranted. I was good at my work, and I went home at the end of each cycle, and I had, on Pellas 4, a life that was unremarkable in the way that most lives are unremarkable, which is to say, it was mine, and it was complete, and it was going nowhere in particular, and I was 31 years old, and I had not yet understood that going nowhere in particular is not a condition to be corrected. I understand it now. The raid on Pellas 4 happened on a morning in the 2nd month of the agricultural review cycle. I know this because I remember the stack of manifests on my desk. I remember the specific form I was annotating. Form 7 Gamma, the seasonal yield variance report, which I had never in 11 years managed to find interesting, and had never needed to find interesting, because it was simply a form among forms in a life among lives. I remember looking up from the form because there was a sound I did not recognize, and then the ceiling of the administratum building came apart, and the light that came through the gap was wrong. Not sunlight, not the particular yellow-grey of Pellis 4's overcast sky. Wrong in the way that things from outside the material universe are wrong when they arrive in it, carrying the quality of somewhere else entirely. I do not remember the transit. This is not unusual. The passage through a webway gate, from everything I have subsequently learned, is not an experience the human mind files coherently. There are impressions, cold, pressure, the specific silence of a place where sound has no medium. But there is no narrative. There is simply the administratum building, and then there is not the administratum building, and in between there is something that my memory declined to record, and that I have, over 6 years, stopped trying to reconstruct. I arrived in Commorragh. Several hundred others arrived with me. I do not know what happened to most of them. I know what happened to some. I will not tell you what happened to some. What I will tell you is this: I am not going to describe to you the early months. I have made a decision, and I want you to understand that decisions, in here, are extraordinarily precious, which is why I make them deliberately and name them to myself when I make them. I have made a decision not to describe the early months. Not because I am protecting you. I am not interested in protecting you. I am not interested in sparing you anything. I am declining to describe the early months, because to describe them would be to spend time in them again, and I have spent enough time in them, and whatever attention I have, I am choosing to spend elsewhere. What I will tell you is that I am here now, and here is a cell that is not quite a cell. It has a chair, a table, a lamp whose light is slightly wrong in color, not wrong enough to be alarming, not wrong enough to be the source of any particular complaint, just wrong enough that after 6 years I have never entirely forgotten I am not somewhere that produces natural light. There is a window. The window shows a portion of Commorragh that I will not attempt to describe to you, because Commorragh resists description the way certain mathematical concepts resist illustration. You can approximate it, you can gesture toward it, but the approximation is always a lie of scale, and the gesture always lands short. What I will say is that the window shows me enough of it to understand that it continues, that it is not contained, that there is more of it in every direction than I can see, more than I could walk in a lifetime, more than I can encompass, that it is a city in the way that a storm is a city, structured, yes, inhabited, yes, but so far beyond the human scale of what a city should be that the word stops being useful before you finish saying it. I have a chair and a table and a wrong-colored lamp and a window that shows me something I cannot describe, and I have been here for 6 years, and the cell is comfortable enough to be insulting, and that is the full inventory of my material circumstances. The question is not why it is comfortable. I know why it is comfortable. The question I have been working on for 6 years with the same methodical attention I used to bring to Form 7 Gamma and the seasonal yield variance reports, except that this question is not a form among forms, and this attention is not something I can go home from. The question is what the comfort costs, what it is for, what the person who made it comfortable expects to get in return. Her name is Viscereth. I will get to Viscereth. First, I want to explain something about survival here, because you need to understand the baseline before you can understand the anomaly. Most people who come to Commorragh do not last long. This is not a dramatic claim. This is simple arithmetic. The Drukhari, and I am going to use that name because it is the one they use for themselves, and because after 6 years I extend them the small courtesy of accurate naming, even when I extend them nothing else. The Drukhari require slaves for several overlapping functions, and the functions are not designed to preserve the slave. They are designed to extract what the slave has, and what a slave has is a body, and a body has a finite amount of what they need before it runs out. And when it runs out, the body is no longer an asset, and assets that produce nothing are not maintained. This is not cruelty, this is inventory management. I catalogued discrepancies in supply systems for 11 years. I understand inventory management. Some slaves last weeks, some months. A very small number, those who are physically exceptional, or who possess skills that the cabals find useful enough to preserve, or who attract the attention of a homunculus for reasons I will not detail, last years. These long-term survivors are not common. They are not celebrated. They are not, in any observable sense, better off for having lasted longer, except in the one absolute and irreducible sense that they are still alive. And alive is the category everything else is built on, and I choose not to argue with that. I have lasted 6 years. I am none of those things. Not physically exceptional, not skilled in any way that serves their functions, not interesting to a homunculus, not beautiful or broken in any of the specific ways that buy time here. I am a scribe from an agri-world. I am 37 years old by my most reliable estimate. I have soft hands from years of administrative work, and a mind trained for discrepancy detection, and no qualities that should have kept me alive in this place for 6 days, let alone 6 years. And yet, every cycle, without exception, Isin brings me water and food that is too good for a slave. Not extravagant, not a demonstration, not a performance, simply better than it needs to be. Better than it is for the others I know are housed in this section, whose trays I have caught brief sight of during the rare moments when doors are open and peripheral vision is still a function I am permitted to use. Mine is better. Mine has always been better. And every few cycles, the intervals irregular, the pattern deliberate in its irregularity, the door opens and it is not Isin, and the person who enters sits in the chair across from mine, and she looks at me, and I look at her, and she asks me a question I did not anticipate, and I answer it, and she listens to the answer with the full and total attention of someone for whom listening is not a courtesy, but a methodology. And then she leaves, and I sit in the chair and I think about the question. I think about why she asked it. I think about what my answer told her, and what I could have said differently, and whether differently would have been better or worse, and what better and worse even mean in a context where the terms of evaluation are entirely hers. This has happened 43 times. I have never understood what she wants. I have spent 6 years, 6 years of the specific, patient, discrepancy detecting attention that kept form 7 gamma accurate for 11 years on a world I will probably never see again, applying that attention to the question of what Viserith wants from me. And I have found no answer that holds. Every answer I construct develops a gap when I look at it long enough. Some inconsistency between what the theory predicts and what actually happens in the room, and I set it aside and begin again. I am still beginning again. She sent a message 2 cycles ago, not spoken, written in the particular script the Drukhari use, that I have learned to read in the same way I learned everything here, against my will, by necessity, because not reading it had costs I was not willing to pay. The message was brief, 3 sentences. It said that she would visit on the next cycle. It said that there were things she wished to discuss. It said, and this is the sentence I have been sitting with, the sentence that has kept me from sleeping through 2 consecutive cycles, the sentence I turn over and over in the specific way I used to turn anomalous figures in a yield report, looking for the error in my reading. It said, I find that the time between our conversations has grown longer than I prefer. 3 sentences, 26 words. I have read them perhaps 200 times. I have been afraid before in this place. I want to be precise about that, because afraid is a word that requires precision here. It is a word that has been stretched and reshaped by its use in Commorragh the way certain tools are reshaped by use, still recognizable, still functional, but no longer the same object that left the factory. I have been afraid in ways that I would not have recognized as fear before I came here, in ways that I could not have named from the inside of my former life, because my former life did not contain the reference. But this is the original fear, the clean fear, the fear that I had in the administratum building when the ceiling came apart and the light was wrong, the simple, unadulterated fear of something approaching that I cannot stop and do not understand. She is coming tomorrow. This is the 44th visit. I have not slept, and I have been trying, since her message came, to identify why this one feels different. Why after 43 conversations that I survived, after 6 years of surviving things I was not equipped to survive, after becoming, by slow and unasked for degrees, a person who can name a servant's favorite color and read the posture of a creature from a civilization 10,000 years older than his own. Why, after all of that, I am afraid in the way I was afraid when the ceiling came apart. I have a theory. I think it is because 43 visits taught me enough to be afraid correctly. In year 1, I was afraid of what she might do to me. In year 2, I was afraid of what she might want. In year 3, I was afraid of what she was learning. In year 4, I began to be afraid of something I could not name. Something about the shape of the visits, the pattern of the questions, the specific progression from what she asked in the first year to what she asked in the fourth. A progression so gradual that I had not noticed it as progression until I looked back and saw where we had started and understood how far we had come. And now, in year 6, with 2 cycles until the 44th visit, I am afraid with the particular precision of a person who has been given almost enough information to understand what is happening to them. Almost. That almost is the whole weight of it. That almost is what keeps me sitting in this chair with the wrong colored light and the untouched tray and the message I have read 200 times. She finds the time between conversations longer than she prefers. I am trying to understand what that costs me. I am trying to understand what it means that I am not sure it costs me anything. That is the worst thing about Commorragh. Not the sounds, not the cages, not the years without sunlight, or the dreams that are no longer quite dreams, or the face that looks back at me in the surface of the water they bring, which is still mine, still recognizably mine, but wearing the specific expression of a man who has learned too many things in the wrong order. The worst thing is that I have been here long enough to be uncertain about simple questions. Questions like, is this dangerous? Questions like, compared to what? Questions like, do I want her to come? She is coming tomorrow. I should sleep. I won't. Chapter 2. What she is made of. The thing I was never prepared for. Not the raid. Not the transit. Not the first weeks in this place, which I have already told you I will not describe, and which I am still not going to describe. So do not wait for it. The thing I was never prepared for. The thing that no Imperial scripture addresses. That no ministorum sermon reaches. That no tactical briefing issued to any soldier who has ever faced them across a battlefield has ever managed to convey, is this. The Drukhari are not cruel. I need you to sit with that. I need you to resist the reflex that is already forming in you. The reflex that says, of course they are cruel. You are their prisoner. You are rationalizing. You have been in that room too long, and she has done something to the way you think. That reflex is reasonable. That reflex is the response of a person who still has the luxury of distance. I am asking you to set it aside for a while, because it is getting in the way of something true. And after 6 years in a place that does not tolerate comfortable untruths, I have lost patience with them. Cruelty implies excess. Cruelty implies a going beyond, a choice to inflict more than is necessary, more than the situation requires, driven by something in the person doing it that needs the overflow. Cruelty is personal. Cruelty is about the one doing it as much as the one receiving it. Cruelty has a taste and a preference and a specific signature you can learn to read. What the Drukhari do is none of those things. What they do is deliberate. What they do is proportionate. What they do is calculated, in every instance, against a precise set of requirements, and the calculation is never in excess of those requirements and never falls short of them. What they do is what they need to do, not because they lack the imagination for more, not because something constrains them, but because excess is waste, and waste, in Commorragh, is the only genuine moral failing. They built a civilization around a need. The need came first. It came screaming into existence 10,000 years ago, when their god was born from the residue of everything they had become, born from the psychic mass of their choosing, born and hungry and reaching for them across the veil. The need came first, and then they built the civilization around it, with the same methodical attention that you would build any city around any necessary resource. You build near water because you need water. You build near trade routes because you need commerce. You build near the harvested suffering of 10,000 worlds because without it, the thing that waits for you in the dark between heartbeats gets a little closer, and then a little closer, and eventually there is no distance left. I know this because Viserith told me. She told me in the 3rd year, on a visit I remember with unusual precision, not because it was more significant than the others at the time, but because I have reconstructed it so many times since that it has acquired the false clarity of a thing examined too closely. She sat in the chair across from mine, and she told me what Commorragh is and what it is for, and what it costs to maintain it. And she told me all of this with the specific equanimity of a person explaining a water treatment system. Not cold, not performed. Simply, here is the mechanism, here is the requirement, here is the engineering that serves the requirement. I am telling you this because you have been asking the wrong questions, and the wrong questions produce poor data, and poor data is an inefficiency I find irritating. She told me that before Slaanesh, before the fall, before the moment that tore their species in half and left half of them the Eldari of the craft worlds, haunted and careful and wrapped in the psychic discipline of people who live in permanent terror of their own emotions. Before all of that, they were something that the galaxy had never seen and would never see again. A civilization of such sophistication, such aesthetic refinement, such absolute freedom from constraint, that they had run out of new things, that they had, in their immortality and their excess, arrived at the specific and terrible horizon of a people who have experienced everything available to experience and found it insufficient. She told me this without shame, without the performance of shame, which would have been worse in its way. She told me it as context, the way you tell someone the history of a place so that the present configuration makes sense, and then the fall, and then the Slaanesh-shaped hole where half of them used to be, and then the survivors in Commorragh, sitting in the wreckage of a civilization that had destroyed itself with its own wanting, and making a decision. Not every species gets to make a decision at that moment. Most are simply destroyed, consumed by what they summoned, overrun by the consequences of what they became, ended by the gap between what they were and what they needed to be. The Drukhari looked at the gap, and they built a bridge. The bridge is Commorragh. The bridge is every raid, every cage, every arena and homunculus coven and cabal and witch cult and all the rest of the machinery of this place. All of it is the bridge. The engineering by which a species keeps itself on the right side of its own damnation. Not triumphant, not gloriously evil. Simply surviving. Choosing survival in the only form available to them and doing it completely, without the comfortable architecture of pretending it is something else. I want to be precise about the moment I understood this, because it matters. It was not in year 3 when she told me. In year 3 I heard it, and I was appropriately horrified. The kind of categorical, bone-deep horror that the information deserves. The horror of a person receiving confirmation that the universe is exactly as dark as they suspected. I felt that horror clearly. I logged in. It was in year 4. Year 4 I was sitting in this chair. The same chair. The furniture has not changed. I think the furniture will not change as long as I am here. And I was thinking about the Imperium, about Pelus IV, about the structure of an institution I had served without examination for 31 years, the vast and grinding and impossibly old machine of the Emperor's will, and I was thinking about what that machine requires to keep running, and what it consumes to meet those requirements, and the specific architecture of fictions it has built around the consumption so that the consuming does not feel like what it is. The tithes, the guard, the billion-strong waves of ordinary human bodies sent into the dark to hold lines that cannot be held, to buy time for a species that is losing. The calculus of acceptable loss that is made every day in every administratum building on every world in the Imperium, including a building on Pelus IV where a mid-ranking scribe used to sit and annotate Form 7 Gamma and feel in some dim and unexamined way that he was part of something. The Imperium needs its billions the way the Drukhari need their suffering. The Drukhari do not pretend otherwise. I want to be clear. This is not exoneration. This is not the argument that they are the same, that one atrocity cancels another. That moral equivalence is what the comparison points toward. The comparison does not point toward equivalence. It points toward something harder to name and harder to dismiss, toward the specific nausea of a person who has looked at two mirrors facing each other and seen the same thing reflecting forever in both directions. I know what I am saying. I know what it means that I am saying it. I know what 6 years in this city has done to the framework I used to use for these questions, and I am not certain whether what it has done constitutes damage or illumination, and I have stopped being certain that the distinction is as clear as I used to think. I want to tell you about Viscereth directly now, not her appearance. Appearance in Commorragh is a costume, a declaration, a political document. What the Drukhari looks like is always also what they are choosing to say about themselves. And what they are choosing to say is always at least 3 things simultaneously, and the surface of any one of those things is designed to redirect your attention from the other 2. I have learned over 43 visits not to begin with what she looks like. I have learned to begin with how she enters a room. She enters the way water enters a low space. Not dramatically. Drama requires effort, and effort requires the admission that the destination required something from you, and Viscereth does not admit things. She moves through rooms as though rooms were places that had been waiting for her to occupy them. There is no performance of ease. It is simply easy, in the way that a thing that has existed for thousands of years and refined itself continuously in those thousands of years is easy in its own skin, not because nothing touches it, but because everything that has touched it has been incorporated, processed, made useful. She is the oldest thing I have ever been in proximity to. I felt her age before I knew it. The body registers these things before the mind catches up. She sits in the chair across from mine. She arranges herself with a precision that is not self-conscious, not the precision of someone who is aware of being watched, but the precision of someone for whom comfort and aesthetic coherence are the same requirement, inseparable, attended to simultaneously without additional effort. And then she looks at me. I want to describe this look because it is the thing I have spent the most time trying to understand, and the thing I understand least. It is not the look of someone evaluating a possession. I have seen that look from others here, and it has a quality of dismissal embedded in it, an essential distancing that says, you are an object, and objects do not look back. Visereth's look has no distancing in it. She looks at me the way you look at something you find genuinely difficult, something that resists your first interpretation and requires a second and then a third, and where each interpretation reveals a new layer of difficulty rather than resolving toward comprehension. She looks at me like a letter she is slowly translating from a language she is still learning. She told me, on the 11th visit, that she has been alive for longer than my entire civilization has kept written records. She told me this not as a boast. Boasting is a form of need, and she is too old for needs expressed outward, but as context. She was explaining why she found something I had said surprising. She said that surprise was at her age genuinely rare. She said that she had believed for the last several centuries that she had encountered every pattern human cognition was capable of producing, that the variations were all known, that the space of human interiority had been, for her purposes, fully explored. She said she had said something similar to the previous occupant of my chair. I asked her what had happened to the previous occupant of my chair.
She looked at me for a moment.
She said, he confirmed my hypothesis. I did not ask anything else about the previous occupant of my chair. I want to tell you what I have learned from 43 conversations. Not what she has told me. She tells me very little directly, almost nothing. The information she offers is always lateral, always arriving from an angle. Never the thing I was trying to understand, but the thing I needed to understand in order to understand the thing I was trying to understand. I have learned to receive what she gives and to reconstruct from it, the way you reconstruct the shape of a vessel from the space it used to occupy. I have learned that she is not the most powerful archon in Commorragh. She is not, by any external measure, at the apex of the hierarchy that governs. That is too simple a word. Governs is too stable a word. That characterizes political life here. She does not have the largest cabal, does not command the most warriors, does not hold the specific territories that confer the most leverage. She is significant, influential, feared in the particular calibrated way that the Drukhari fear each other, which is to say, respected as a threat and kept at an alliance distance. What she has is something harder to quantify than territory. She has reputation for patience. In a civilization where most interactions are transactions conducted at speed, where the preferred mode is the rapid exchange, the quick advantage taken, the efficient consumption, Visereth is known for projects that take decades, for investments of attention that do not pay off in any time frame that most of her contemporaries think in, for a quality of interest that is, in Commorragh, genuinely strange. She is interested in understanding, not power, not sensation. Understanding. I know this because I have watched the questions change across 43 visits. In year 1, the questions were about experience. What had I seen? What had I felt? What was the texture of specific events in my life before I came here? The questions of someone cataloguing a specimen's history. In year 2, they became about cognition. How do you think about this? How do you process that? What is the internal experience of the specific kind of thinking you do? The questions of someone mapping a mechanism. In year 3, they became about meaning. What do you value? What do you consider worth preserving? What is the thing you would not trade regardless of the cost? The questions of someone who has moved past the mechanism and wants to understand what it runs on. And in year 4, and year 5, and year 6, the questions have become something I do not have a category for. They have become conversations, genuine exchanges, where she offers something as well as takes something, where the direction of the inquiry is not entirely hers, where there have been, and I am going to say this clearly, without the deflection of euphemism, because the deflection is a form of lying, and I have run out of patience with that too. There have been visits in which I was not aware for periods of time that I was a prisoner, that I was in Commorragh, that the person across the table was a Drukhari archon who has kept me alive for reasons she has never fully explained, for a purpose she has never described. There have been visits in which I was simply thinking hard about something interesting, in the company of someone who found it equally interesting, and the visits ended, and I sat in the chair after she left and felt, and this is the word, this is the true word, I am not going to manage it with something more defensible, felt the specific quiet satisfaction of having used my mind well. I want you to understand what I am telling you. I want you to understand that I am not telling you she is good. I am not telling you the visits have corrected for what this place is, or what she is, or what it means that I am here. I am telling you that human cognition is not built for clean distinctions between nourishment and poison when they arrive in the same form. I am telling you that the part of me that thinks, the part that catalogued discrepancies and noticed patterns and asked the question that always underlies all other questions, which is, what is this, really, underneath what it appears to be? That part has been, in this place, more fully used than it was ever used on Pellis 4, more challenged, more engaged, and she knows this. She has watched this happen across 6 years with the patience of someone who planted something and returned daily to observe the growth. And I am only now, in the 2 cycles since her message arrived, in the long and sleepless arithmetic of sitting in this chair and trying to understand what the 44th visit means, I am only now beginning to ask the question I should have been asking since year 1. Not, what does she want? But, what does she want it for? There is a particular way the city sounds at what I approximate as late cycle. The sounds that constitute the constant baseline of Commorragh, the ones I will not describe, the ones I told you I had stopped hearing as sounds, those recede slightly, not to silence. Silence is not a thing Commorragh produces, but to a lower register, a more distant frequency, so that the city feels, and I use the word with full awareness of its absurdity, quieter. Not quiet, quieter. In this quieter time, I think about what she has built over 6 years. The visits, the questions, the food that is too good for a slave, and the lamp that is slightly wrong in color, and the window and the chair and all of the small, careful material facts of a cell designed for someone's comfort. I think about the design of it. I think about what a person is building when they build something like this, with this much patience. And I think about the visit tomorrow, and the sentence from her message. I find that the time between our conversations has grown longer than I prefer, and I think about what it means that she has a preference about the time, that the time matters to her, that there is, in her accounting of this arrangement, a variable that she monitors and finds unsatisfactory when it exceeds certain limits. I think she has been, in a way, I do not have the vocabulary for, and am not certain I want to develop the vocabulary for, lonely. And then I think, no, that is a human word. That is a word built for a human architecture of need, and she is 10,000 years old, and her architecture of need is something my psychology is not configured to map, and projecting loneliness onto her is the thing that would comfort me, so it is probably the thing that is least accurate. And then I think, but what if accuracy and comfort are not, in this instance, opposites? And then the lamp flickers. It does that occasionally for no reason I have identified in 6 years. And the city sounds rise for a moment in the flicker, and then recede again. and I am still in the chair, and tomorrow is coming. And I am afraid in a way I have not been afraid since the ceiling came apart on Pellis 4. Not afraid of what she will do, afraid of what she will ask. Afraid specifically of what my answer will be. Because I have spent 2 cycles reviewing 43 visits, and I have found in that review a pattern I did not see while I was inside it. A pattern in the questions, a direction, a progression so gradual it was invisible in the individual visits, and visible only in the retrospect of having them all in front of me simultaneously. She has been moving, question by question, visit by visit, across 6 years, towards something. And I do not know what she will ask tomorrow. But I know, in the way that a scribe knows, in the specific way of a person who detects discrepancies for a living, who reads the gap between what a document says and what it means. I know that tomorrow she reaches the end of the progression, that tomorrow she asks what she has been building toward, and that I will not be able to refuse it, not because of fear of what refusal costs, but because after 43 visits, I am no longer certain I want to. That is the thing I have not told you yet. That is the thing I have been circling. That is the worst thing about Commorragh, the real worst thing, not the sounds, not the years, not the food that is too good and the light that is slightly wrong, and the servant whose name I know, and whose favorite color I know, and whose moods I can read from the way she sets down a tray. The worst thing is that I am not certain when she comes tomorrow that I will be performing willingness. The worst thing is that I do not know anymore where performance ends. She is coming tomorrow, and I am still in the chair, and the city is as quiet as it gets, and the lamp is still wrong, and I am still here. Chapter 3, the 44th visit. She did not knock. They do not knock. I knew she would not knock. I have known for 44 visits, for 6 years, across every cycle in which I have sat in this chair and waited for the door, that she would not knock, and I have never once stopped the part of myself that listens for it, that waits for the small courtesy of a sound before entry. That part of me has been waiting for 6 years, and it is still waiting, and I think it will wait until I am no longer in a position to wait for anything, because that part of me is not rational and does not respond to evidence, and is not the part I have been training. It is the part that is still on Pellis 4, the part that still thinks the world contains doors that announce themselves. The door opened, and she came in, and she sat in the chair across from mine, and I sat in mine, and neither of us said anything. I want to describe this silence carefully, because it was not the silence of 2 people who had nothing to say. It was not the silence of tension, not the specific pressurized quiet of a room in which something is about to happen, and both people know it. It was, and I have been turning this over since she left, trying to find the accurate word, because the accurate word matters, and I am not willing to settle. It was the silence of 2 people who have been in enough rooms together that silence has become one of the things they do in rooms together, a shared behavior, a mutual thing. I have shared silences with Visereth. That sentence would have horrified me in year 1. In year 6 it is simply true, and the horror of its truth is different and quieter, and in some ways harder to carry than the louder horror it replaced. We sat in silence for what I estimate was 4 minutes. Somewhere beyond the window, somewhere in the city that does not stop, something screamed. Neither of us acknowledged it. We have both been in this room enough times to have developed, without discussion or agreement, a shared protocol about the sounds from outside. The protocol is, we do not acknowledge them. The protocol has never been stated. It exists because it evolved, because it was useful, because we are both, in our very different ways, people who dispense with what is not useful. The sounds serve no function in the room, so in the room they do not exist. I want you to understand what it means that I have a shared protocol with Visereth. I want you to understand that I understand what it means, that I am not telling you this without knowing what I am telling you. That self-awareness does not neutralize the fact. It just means I carry it with my eyes open. She spoke first. She always speaks first. In 44 visits, she has always spoken first, and I have spent time, more time than I should have, time that in retrospect I wish I had spent on other things, wondering whether this is deliberate, whether she speaks first as a choice, a control, an exercise of the specific power that comes from being the one who decides when the silence ends, whether she speaks first because she is simply, constitutionally, someone for whom waiting is a tool and deploying it is a reflex, or whether she speaks first because she has more to say. She said, "Tell me about the smell of it." I did not understand immediately. My mind, which had been preparing for 6 years and 2 cycles for this conversation, had prepared for many things. It had prepared for the question about my survival, the question I have been expecting since year 2, the one about how I have lasted, what mechanism underlies the endurance, what she has identified in 43 visits that she is now ready to name directly. It had prepared for something about the future, about what comes next, about what the visits have been building toward, about whatever is at the end of the progression I identified in the 2 sleepless cycles before her arrival. It had not prepared for, "Tell me about the smell of it." I said, "The smell of what?" She looked at me with the translation look, patient, complete. The look that says, "I know you understood the question, and I know you are asking for specification, and I know why. And I am going to give you the specification because the specification is part of the question." She said, "Pellus IV. I want to describe what happened next with precision, because precision is all I have left, and I will not let this moment be imprecise." I opened my mouth to answer, and what I felt was nothing. For 1 full second, nothing. The blank of a person who has been asked something so unexpected and so direct and so perfectly aimed at the specific coordinates of a thing they have spent 6 years not looking at directly, that the answer cannot immediately surface, because the answer is buried under everything that has been put on top of it in 6 years of not looking. And then it surfaced, not gradually, all at once. The smell of Pellus IV is damp earth and machine oil, and the specific mineral quality of water processed through industrial filtration systems for so long that it has lost any characteristic of the source it came from. It is promethium exhaust from the harvester rigs that run the outer fields in the growing seasons, a smell I hated for 11 years and have not been able to reconstruct with any accuracy since I left, since I was taken, and which I would give significant things to smell again. It is the particular staleness of administratum building air, cycled through aging atmospheric processes and carrying the faint residue of 200 people spending their working hours in sealed offices. It is bread, actual bread, baked in the commissary kitchen 2 floors below the records division, available twice a year at the harvest festivals, never enough of it, always gone before you reach the front of the queue, if you arrived more than 40 minutes after the doors opened. I told her all of this. I did not decide to tell her. The telling simply happened, the way bleeding happens. Not a choice, but a consequence, the result of something being opened that had been closed for a long time. She listened with the full and total attention that is her most consistent quality. Not nodding. She does not nod. I do not think she has ever nodded. Nodding is a human habit of social performance, and she has none of those. But present, entirely present. The quality of her listening is something I have tried to describe to myself many times across 44 visits, and the closest I have come is this. Most people listen in order to respond. She listens in order to receive. There is no preparation for response happening while I speak. There is only the receiving of what I say, taken in completely, processed somewhere I cannot see, without any of the social furniture that humans use to demonstrate that listening is occurring. She listens like a person reading. When I finished, she did not speak immediately. She sat with what I had said for a moment, 3 seconds, perhaps 4, and then she said, "You are homesick." Not a question, not a revelation, a notation. The matter-of-fact identification of a condition she had just observed, the way you would say that coupling is failing or this column does not balance. And I said, and this is the moment I have been reconstructing since. This is the moment I keep returning to. This is the moment that everything before it was preparation for, and everything after it is consequence of. I said, yes. Not reluctantly. Not with the defensive qualification of a person managing their exposure. Simply, yes. Because it was true and she had said the true thing, and I have spent 6 years in this room learning that there is no functional difference, in the end, between concealing the true thing from her and handing it to her. She arrives at the true thing regardless. The only variable is how much of my own energy I spend on the concealment. Yes. She looked at me for a moment after I said it, and then she asked the second question. She said, "What is it you miss? Not the place, the feeling the place gave you. I want to tell you that I deflected this. I want to tell you that I recognize the question for what it was. The next step in the progression, deeper than the first, aimed at something more interior than the memory of bread and machine oil, and that I managed it with the careful distance I have been trying to maintain for 6 years. I deflected for perhaps 30 seconds. She waited. 30 seconds of silence in that room, in Visereth's silence, with the translation look across the table, and the city sounds removed from the room by shared protocol, and the lamp slightly wrong in color, and the tray of food I had not touched, because I had not been able to eat in 2 cycles. 30 seconds in all of that is a long time. It has a weight. It has a pressure that is not hostile, not coercive, simply present. The pressure of being waited for by someone for whom waiting costs nothing. I said, belonging to a moment, not needing it to be different. She received this. 3 seconds. She said, "Give me an example." I said, "The morning routine, before the cycle started. The same sequence of small actions performed in the same order, not because the order mattered, but because the sameness of it meant that the day had not yet asked anything difficult of me, and I had not yet asked anything difficult of the day, and in that interval, in that ordinary, unremarkable interval between waking and the first obligation, I was simply present in my own existence without requirement." She was quiet for longer this time, 7 seconds. I counted. She said, "You valued the tedium." I said, "I valued what the tedium meant, that nothing was wrong, that nothing was about to ask me to be more than I was. That day would make reasonable demands, and I would meet them, and they would not exceed what I had to give." She said, "And now?" I said, "Now every demand exceeds what I have to give, and I give it anyway, because the alternative is to stop giving, and I have seen what stopping looks like, and it is not available to me." She looked at me for a long time. She said, "When did you last feel it?" "Not on Pellis 4. Here. When in this place did you last experience what you just described? Presence without requirement, belonging to a moment without needing it to be different." And I opened my mouth to say, "Never. I am going to ask you to stay with me through what comes next. I am going to ask you not to look away from it, not to manage it with the comfortable interpretation that is already assembling itself. Not to tell yourself that I am confused or damaged or no longer capable of the clear-sighted assessment I used to bring to supply manifests and seasonal variance reports. I am going to ask you to receive what I am about to tell you with the same quality of attention she brought to receiving everything I said in that room. I opened my mouth to say never, and the word did not come. The word did not come because it was not true, and I had, spent 6 years telling myself nothing but true things, in the specific and private record of my own interior, in the part of the mind that is the last thing to be compromised, and that I have protected with everything available to me. Because without that record, without that private accounting of what is real and what I am telling myself is real, there is nothing left that is identifiably Aldric. There is only the person this place has made, and that person is not no one, but that person is not what I brought here either. So when the word never came, I did not force it. I sat with the true thing instead. The true thing is this. There have been moments in this room, in 43 visits, in the years of questions and silences, and shared protocols, and the specific quality of being listened to by someone who listens the way she listens. There have been moments in which I was not aware of where I was. Not because I forgot, not because she did something the way I perceive, but because the thinking was good enough, and the engagement was complete enough, and the exchange was real enough, that the context fell away, and there was only the quality of the thought itself. The problem of the idea, the pleasure, and I will use that word, I am not afraid of the word is accurate. The pleasure of a mind working at the edge of what it can do, in the company of something that pushes it there and then waits to see what it produces. The pleasure of being known, not used, not managed, known, in the specific and irreplaceable sense of being perceived accurately, without the reduction that most perception applies to the thing it perceives, seen as the thing you actually are rather than the thing you present for viewing. I have felt that here, in this room, in this cell with the wrong-colored light, and the window that shows me something I cannot describe. I have felt it 43 times. The word never did not come because it would have been a lie, and I do not tell lies in the private record. And she was watching me arrive at this. I could see her watching me arrive at it, in the way I now recognize her attention, operating when it is doing something deliberate, a slight, almost undetectable sharpening, a quality of increased focus that is not itself visible, but that changes the quality of the room, the way a change in atmospheric pressure changes a room before you can name what is different. She was watching me. She was waiting for me to arrive, and when I arrived she already knew I was there, because she had known I was going to arrive there before the visit started, before the question about the smell, before the 30 seconds of deflection and the morning routine and the space between waking and obligation. She had known where the progression ended. She had built the progression to end there. And I looked at her across the table in the silence, and she smiled. I need to tell you about the smile. In 44 visits, across 6 years, across every question and every silence and every moment in that room, she had not smiled. Not once. I want to be precise about this, because it is possible, in retrospect, to believe you have seen something many times that you have in fact seen once, the singularity of it retrospectively distributed across memory to make it feel less singular. I am not doing that. I am certain. In 43 visits, she did not smile. The smile was, I am going to use a word that I am aware is insufficient, and that I am using anyway because nothing sufficient exists. The smile was ancient. Not warm, not cold, not the social performance of pleasure. The expression of a person who has been waiting for something for a very long time and has just seen it arrive. The expression of a person for whom the arrival confirms a hypothesis they were confident in, but had not, until this moment, been able to confirm directly. The expression of a person who is satisfied. She looked at me with that smile for 4 seconds, and then she rose from the chair, and the smile closed, not disappeared. Closed, the way a door closes, complete and soundless. And she moved toward the door with the same ease she always moves with, the ease of water finding a low space. And then she paused, at the door. They always pause at the door. I have noted this across 43 visits, every visit in which something significant has been said or given or taken, there is a pause at the door. The door is where they leave you with the thing they most want you to carry. I do not know if it is conscious. I do not know if it is a Drukhari habit, a cultural behavior, an instinct of the specifically ancient. I only know it happens, and that when it happens I have learned to be more afraid of what follows than of anything that preceded it. She said without turning, "I will be attending a gathering of the High Cabals beginning in 3 cycles. I will be absent for some time." I said nothing. I was processing the specific wait for some time in Commorragh. She said, "I have given instructions that you are not to be disturbed during my absence." She said it the way she says everything that is designed to be received in 2 registers simultaneously. The surface register, where it is a statement of fact, and the register beneath, where it is something else entirely. And then she said, "The instructions apply to my cabal." And I heard, in the gap between that sentence and the silence that followed it, the full shape of what she was telling me. Not what the instructions applied to, what they did not apply to. The specific and deliberate omission left in the sentence like a space in a manifest where a number should be, the kind of space that a scribe trained in discrepancy detection would notice immediately. She said, "Cyrith has expressed an interest in you for some years. I have, until now, given him no access. Until now." She said, "I cannot guarantee that my instructions will be sufficient to discourage him during a prolonged absence." I said, "Who is Cyrith?" She turned then. She looked at me. The translation looks, one final time, and something in it that I had not seen in 43 visits. Not quite pity, because pity requires an acknowledgement of the other person's helplessness, and she does not acknowledge helplessness. It is not a category she operates in, but something adjacent to it. Something that in a human face would be the face of a person who has just told you something they knew you did not want to know, and who is aware of what the knowing will cost you. She said, "A homunculus. He is very patient, and he has been very interested in you specifically, and he is not interested in the same things I am interested in." A pause. She said, "I thought you should know." And then the door closed, and I sat in the chair, and the city sounded the way it always sounds, and the lamp was the color it has always been, and the tray of food I had not eaten was still on the table, and Isin would come to collect it in the next cycle, and she would see that I had not eaten, and her posture on the following cycle would tell me whether that fact had been noted, and what the noting of it meant. And I was thinking about a word. Until now. She had kept him away. For some years she had kept a homunculus who was interested in me away from me, and she had not told me, and I had not known, and I have been sitting in this cell, believing that my survival was the product of her interest, and I had not once, in 6 years of discrepancy detection, of pattern recognition, of the careful methodical attention I brought to everything available to me in this room, I had not once asked what my survival was being protected from. I had been looking at the lamp, and not looking at what the lamp was keeping out of the dark. And now the lamp was leaving, and I was sitting in the chair trying to determine whether what she had just done to me was kindness, or the most sophisticated cruelty available to a mind that has been refining cruelty for 10,000 years, and I could not determine it. And I think that was precisely the point. That was the end of the progression. Not the question about the smell, not the question about belonging to a moment, not even the smile, which I will carry until I no longer carry anything. The end of the progression was this. She left me with a question I cannot answer, and I am still here, and the city is still sounding, and in 3 cycles she will be gone, and I have just learned the name Sireth, and I do not know yet what knowing that name is going to cost me, but I know, in the way I know things, in the specific and unglamorous way of a person trained to notice the gap between what a document says and what it means, I know that the knowing has already started. Chapter 4. What the homunculus knows. He did not come immediately. I want you to understand what that cost me. Not the waiting itself. I have been waiting in this room for 6 years. I have developed a relationship with waiting that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. I know its textures and its registers and the specific difference between waiting that has an object and waiting that has lost one. I know waiting the way you know is a chronic condition. You do not make peace with it. You simply stop being surprised by it. What the delay cost me was something different. It cost me hope. Not hope of rescue. I surrendered that in year 2, in the specific and necessary way that you surrender something whose weight you can no longer carry without putting down something more essential. Not hope of return, not hope of the door opening, and a thunderhawk descending through the wrong-colored sky, and a voice in low Gothic calling my name and meaning it. That hope went a long time ago, and its going was a clean thing, a necessary amputation, and I do not mourn it. What I mean is smaller and more shameful. In the 3 cycles between Visereth's departure and Sireth's arrival, I began to hope that she had been wrong, that the instructions had held, that Sireth, whoever Sireth was, had decided against the visit, or had been redirected by something more interesting, or had simply, in the way of all bureaucratic intentions that are not followed immediately, forgotten. I began to construct in the specific and desperate architecture of a mind with nothing else to build, the possibility that the threat she had named was not coming. I want to be clear about what I am describing. I am describing a scribe from an agri-world, trained in the detection of comfortable untruths in supply manifests, spending 3 cycles actively constructing a comfortable untruth about his own situation, and then, and this is the part I cannot set down cleanly, choosing to believe it. Not because the evidence supported it, because the evidence was absent, an absence felt in those 3 cycles, like mercy. On the 4th cycle after her departure, the door opened, and I understood, in the first second, that Visereth had not been wrong. The first thing I noticed was the silence he brought with him. Not the silence of someone who does not speak. He speaks, I would learn, at considerable length and with considerable precision. The silence I mean is the silence of someone around whom sound behaves differently, around whom the room reorganizes itself slightly, the way rooms reorganize around certain kinds of presence, the presence that has spent enough time in places where the ordinary rules of what is and is not possible have been systematically dismantled and rebuilt to different specifications. He is old, older than Visereth, or carrying his age differently. Not the ease of water finding a low space, but the stillness of something that has been in one position for long enough that the position has become structural. He is tall in a way that seems less like height and more like extension, like something that has been added to over time without a unifying plan. The modifications that homunculi make to themselves are, I have learned, never cosmetic. They are always functional, always the expression of a specific research interest made permanent in flesh. What Sirith has done to himself I will not describe. I will tell you that the modifications are old, and that they have been integrated with the patience of someone who is not in a hurry and has never needed to be in a hurry and has made an aesthetic of the unhurriedness. He looked at me. It was not the translation look. I want to be precise about this because the distinction matters more than anything else I will tell you about him. Visereth's look had difficulty in it, the difficulty of something resisting easy interpretation, the look of someone encountering a text they cannot immediately pass. There was, in that look, the acknowledgement of my complexity, the recognition that I was a thing that required effort to understand. Sirith's look had no difficulty in it. He looked at me the way you look at a mechanism whose function you have already determined and whose interior you intend to examine in order to confirm what you already know. He looked at me like something he was about to open. He said without introduction, without the performance of social arrival that even Visereth maintained in her first visits, "You are smaller than I expected." I said nothing. He said, "Not physically, in terms of what accounts for you." He moved to the chair, Visereth's chair, the chair across from mine, the chair that has held her 44 times and now held him, and he sat in it with the deliberate economy of someone for whom every physical action is a considered expenditure. Visereth's notes describe something exceptional. I have been reading her notes for 4 years, whenever she permitted me access, which was not often. I expected the notes to be larger than the subject. They are not. You are exactly what she described, which is itself interesting, because Visereth tends toward generous interpretation. I said, "She takes notes." He looked at me. "Of course she takes notes. What did you think the visits were?" I want to tell you what the next several cycles were like, but I am aware that linear description is not adequate to the experience, so I am going to try something different. I am going to try to describe Sirith the way I would describe a system, not the interactions, but the architecture, the underlying structure of what he is and what he wants and what he represents, because the interactions will only make sense if you understand the structure first. Visereth's interest in me was, at its most precise, interpersonal. She came to the room to exchange, to give and take in proportions that always favored her, but that involved genuine transaction. She brought something to the room. The quality of her attention, the specific and irreplaceable experience of being perceived completely by something 10,000 years old. The questions that pushed my thinking into territory it would not have found alone. She brought that. She took whatever she took. Whatever the 6 years of questions produced that fed whatever need drove the patience of the project. But she brought something. Sirith brings nothing. I do not mean this as a moral statement. I mean it as a structural one. He does not come to exchange. He comes to examine. There is no transaction in it. There is the specimen, and there is the examiner, and the examiner's interest in the specimen is real and total, and entirely directed at understanding what the specimen is made of, and the specimen's experience of the examination is, from the examiner's perspective, incidental data, useful if it surfaces during the process, not the point. This is not cruelty. I have already told you about cruelty. This is something harder to defend against than cruelty, because cruelty at least locates you in the examiner's emotional register. Cruelty requires you to matter in some way to the person doing it. What Sirith does removes you from the emotional register entirely. You are not a person to him. You are not an object either. Objects are inert, and he is interested in the fact that I am not inert, that I process and respond and adapt. You are a question, a phenomenon requiring explanation. And a phenomenon does not have preferences about how it is examined. He told me this directly on his 3rd visit, not as a warning or a cruelty, as information. He said, "I want you to understand what I am doing here so that your responses are not contaminated by misapprehension. Misapprehension produces defensive behavior, and defensive behavior obscures the data." I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I am trying to understand why you are still you." He explained it across several visits, in the careful incremental way of a scholar building an argument. Not for my benefit, I understood quickly, but because the explanation was how he organized his thinking, and I was the most proximate available audience. He explained that the question of long-term slave survival in Commorragh was, from a biological and psychological perspective, not the interesting question. The interesting question was not how long, but what remains. What specifically survives in a person who survives here. He had studied this question for a long time. He had access to subjects that Visereth would not have permitted me to know about. Subjects whose experiences of Commorragh had been more direct and less curated than mine. Subjects whose survival had produced various outcomes on the spectrum between functional adaptation and complete dissolution of the self. He had documentation. He had, by any measure I could assess, more data on the psychological fate of long-term captives in Commorragh than any institution in the Imperium. His finding, arrived at across decades of examination, was this: that survival here, real survival, not biological persistence, but the continuity of the thing that makes a person the person they are, was, for baseline humans, without psychic gifts or physical modification, essentially impossible beyond a certain threshold. That the specific conditions of Commorragh were, over sufficient time, invariably corrosive to the architecture of selfhood in ways that could not be reversed, and that produced, in survivors past the threshold, something that was biologically continuous with the original person, but psychologically a different entity. Not broken, not destroyed, replaced. Gradually, incrementally, by something shaped by Commorragh rather than by whatever shaped them before. He said, "The threshold varies by individual, but rarely exceeds 4 years. You have been here 6. He looked at me with the examining look. He said, "And you are still you. I have read 6 years of Visereth's notes, and I have sat across from you for 3 visits now, and I am telling you with the confidence of someone who has been studying this question for longer than your civilization has kept written records. You are still you, identifiably, structurally. The architecture has not been replaced, and I need to understand why, because it should not be possible. And when something is not possible, and it happens regardless, the not possibleness is the most interesting thing in the room." He asked me questions that were not like Visereth's questions. Visereth's questions were about the interior, about experience, memory, meaning, the specific quality of inner life in a person navigating an impossible situation. Her questions assumed the interior was real and wanted to map it. Cyrith's questions were about the mechanism. He wanted to know not what I felt, but how I processed feeling. Not what I remembered, but how my memory organized itself, what it prioritized, what it allowed to recede, and what it held in the foreground, and whether those choices were conscious or structural. He asked about my sleep, not whether I slept, but what the architecture of sleep was, how dreams operated, whether they were continuous with waking experience or distinct from it. He asked about my pain responses. He asked about my threshold for despair, not whether I experienced despair, but how quickly I recovered from it, and what the recovery mechanism was. He was mapping the system. I answered because, and this is the piece I want to give you directly, without the management of euphemism, I answered because the questions were, in their cold and dissective way, interesting. Because they asked me to examine myself with a precision I had not previously applied. Because the act of answering well required a quality of self-observation that I had not known I was capable of. Because even Sireth's examination, aimed as it was not at me but at the thing I was made of, was a form of attention. And attention, in here, even the attention of a homunculus who is looking at you the way you look at a mechanism, is not nothing. I am aware of what I am telling you. I am telling you that I found the attention of something that wants to take me apart, preferable to no attention at all. I am telling you that 6 years in Commorragh has not left my relationship with attention intact. I know this. I am telling you anyway because accuracy matters more than the version of this that leaves me in a better light. On the 5th visit, he told me about Viserith's project. He told me in the same way he told me everything, without apparent awareness of the weight of it, the way you relay a fact that is significant to the recipient and unremarkable to you, because you are the scientist and not the subject, and the data point that alters the subject's entire framework is, to you, simply a data point. He said, Viserith's interest in you was not, in the primary sense, intellectual curiosity. I said, what was it? He said, comparative observation. She has been experiencing, for the last several centuries, the specific deterioration that affects our people over a sufficient span of time, the dulling, the habituation, the progressive narrowing of the range of experience that registers as genuinely novel. He paused. Not for effect, I had learned by then that his pauses were computational, not theatrical. She has tried many things. The deterioration is well documented among us, and the interventions are various, and most are temporary in their effect. You were an intervention. I said, I was an intervention. He said, your responses to your situation, the specific quality of unguarded, unmediated human reaction to genuine extremity, maintained across 6 years without the habituation that should have eliminated it, produced in her a quality of vicarious experience that she had not accessed in some time. Your continued capacity for genuine response restored, temporarily and intermittently, her own capacity for genuine response. You were, in functional terms, a source. He looked at me. He said, not a person in her operational framework, a source. I want to tell you about the 3 seconds after he said that. 3 seconds is not a long time. In 3 seconds, you can take 1 breath, slowly. In 3 seconds, if you are moving at a reasonable pace, you can cover perhaps 4 meters of ground. In 3 seconds, a thought of moderate complexity can be initiated but not completed. 3 seconds is not long. In 3 seconds, in that chair, I experienced something that I am going to describe accurately, even though accurate description makes me look like someone whose grip on their own situation is less secure than I have been presenting. In those 3 seconds, I felt something leave me. Not dramatically, not with the quality of rupture or collapse or any of the violent metaphors that loss tends to attract. It left the way warmth leaves a room when someone opens a window. Gradually, at the edges first, and then from the center, and then it is simply gone, and the room is not the room it was. What left me was, and I am going to find the precise word, and use it, and not replace it with something more manageable. What left me was the version of the visits that I had been living in, the version in which the interest was in me, in which the questions were about my interiority, because my interiority mattered, because she found the thing I was. The particular configuration of Aldric Voss, scribe, Pelus IV, unremarkable in all the ways that turned out to matter, genuinely interesting as a thing in itself. The version in which what happened in that room, across 44 visits, was an exchange between 2 minds, asymmetrical in every power dimension, compromised by every circumstance, but real in the way that things are real when 2 people are genuinely present with each other. That version left the room. What it left behind was a different version, a version in which I was a source, in which my unguarded human responses were the resource, and the resource was what she came for, and the interest was in the quality of the resource, not the thing that produced it. In which the feeling of being known, the feeling I told you about, the feeling I had protected from direct examination for 6 years, because I knew, some part of me knew, that direct examination would find something wrong in it, in which that feeling was not what I thought it was, not knowing, harvesting. The harvest is mistaken for knowing by the thing being harvested, which is exactly the mistake you would want the thing to make if you were the harvester. 3 seconds. And then the 3 seconds ended, and I sat in the chair, and Sireth was still across from me with his examining look, watching the 3 seconds happen with the attention of someone observing a response and making notes, and his expression did not change because his expression never changed. And I looked at him for a moment, and then I looked at the table, and then I looked at the window that shows me something I cannot describe, and I thought, does the distinction matter? That is the question I want to give you, because it is the question I have been unable to put down since, not as rhetoric, not as the performed bewilderment of a person trying to find comfort in ambiguity, as a genuine inquiry with genuine stakes, to which I do not have a genuine answer. Does it matter? She kept me here. She kept me alive when the arithmetic of this place said I should not be alive. She kept homunculus away from me for 4 years. She brought me water that was too good for a slave, and she came 44 times, and she asked me questions that pushed my thinking to the edge of what it could do, and she listened the way no one on Pelus IV ever listened, with the complete and total and undivided attention of something that had decided to attend, and was attending absolutely, and she was drawing from me while she did it, taking something, using my capacity for genuine response to restore her own. Does the taking cancel the giving? Does the usage void the reality of what was exchanged? Is a thing that nourished me and depleted me simultaneously? Is that harm? Is that a kindness with a cost? Or is it a cost dressed as a kindness? And does the dressing matter if the nourishment was real? I am a scribe. I was trained to find the true figure underneath the presented one. I am trying to find the true figure here and I cannot find it, and I have been thinking since those 3 seconds ended and Sireth continued and the visit eventually concluded and the door closed. I think that the inability to find it might be the answer, that the question might genuinely not resolve, that this is one of the discrepancies that does not have an error underlying it, that some columns simply do not balance, and the correct notation is not an answer, but an acknowledgement that the answer is not available. I think she knew it would not resolve. I think she knew that I would spend a long time in this chair trying to resolve it. I think she found that interesting. I think she was right too. Sireth came back on the 7th cycle. He sat down and he looked at me for a moment, and then he said, with the same conversational absence of drama that characterized everything he said, I have submitted a request to Visereth for transfer of your custody to my coven. I said, when will she return? He said, I don't know. The gathering may extend. These things are contingent. He tilted his head slightly, a movement that on a human face would be curiosity, and on his face was the external expression of a computational process, an adjustment of sensory orientation. You are hoping she will refuse. I did not answer. He said, that is interesting in itself, that your preferred outcome is to remain the property of the Archon, who kept you as a source rather than transfer to someone who intends to examine you directly. The preference for the familiar harm over the unfamiliar one. Predictable, but the degree of it is notable. I said, what do you intend to do if the transfer is granted? He was quiet for a moment. Not the comfortable silence of Visereth, the silence of a person determining how much of the answer to give, and in what order. He said, Viscereth has spent 6 years documenting your survival from the outside. She has produced excellent observational records. What she cannot produce is an account of the mechanism, of what, structurally and biologically and psychologically, underlies the survival, of what survival is made of at the level below observation. A pause. I intend to find that. The methodology requires access that observation does not. I said, access to what? He looked at me with the examining look. He said, to the interior. And then he said, and this is the sentence he left me with, the sentence he placed at the door the way they always place things at doors, the sentence I have been carrying since the moment he said it, and that I am going to carry until it is no longer mine to carry. He said, Viscereth kept you intact. That was her requirement. The intactness was the resource, and damaging the resource was counterproductive to her purposes. I have no such requirement. I want you to know that. I want you to have that information clearly before Viscereth returns or does not return, so that you understand the full dimension of what her absence means. He rose. He said, I will tell you one more thing, because I believe you will find it useful, and because useful information, correctly placed, produces more interesting responses than the alternative. He said, she has not refused the transfer yet. He said, she has not responded. And then the door closed, and the city sounded the way it always sounds. And I sat in the chair with the wrong-colored light, and the table, and the tray, and the window, and the name Sirith, and the word intact, and the knowledge that somewhere in Commorragh, at a gathering of the high cabals, a message was sitting without a response, and the no response was itself a response, or the beginning of one, or the absence of one, and I could not tell which, and the not telling was the most frightening thing in a place that had given me 6 years of things to be frightened of. She has not responded. She kept me alive for 6 years. She was drawing from me while she did it. She has not refused the transfer. I am trying to determine whether these facts belong to the same story or different stories, whether the 6 years and the drawing and the non-refusal are a coherent account of a single entity whose nature I understand well enough to predict, or whether I have spent 6 years building a portrait that was never accurate and am only now being shown the gaps. I am trying to determine whether she is coming back. I am trying to determine whether coming back means what I think it means. I am trying to determine whether what I think it means tells me something about the situation, or something about what 6 years in this room has done to me. There is a word for the thing I feel when I think about her not returning. I know what the word is. I am not ready to say it yet. I am going to say it in the next cycle, whether or not I am ready. Chapter 5. What interesting costs. She has not come back. I want to say that plainly before I say anything else, because everything else I am going to tell you sits on top of that fact. And if the fact is obscured by what sits on top of it, then what I am about to give you will not land where it needs to land. She has not come back. It has been, by the most reliable count I can construct from the intervals between Sirith's visits, which have become my only consistent temporal reference, it has been somewhere between 11 and 14 cycles since the gathering began. I do not know the duration of a high cabal gathering. I do not know if 11 cycles is long or short. I do not know if her absence is political, strategic, chosen, or something else entirely, something in the vocabulary of Commorragh that I do not have the translation for. I know she has not come back. I know Sirith has been here 4 more times. I know that on his most recent visit he told me, in the same informational register he uses for everything, that Viscereth's response to the transfer request remains outstanding. That outstanding in this context is not a bureaucratic delay. That in Commorragh, when an Archon of Viscereth's standing does not respond to a formal request from a homunculus coven, The non-response is itself a communication. He told me that he was still determining what it communicated. He told me that his patience was not inexhaustible. And then he left. And I have been in the chair since. I need to tell you the thing that no account of the Drukhari has ever told you. Not the raids, not the arenas, not the homunculi or the architecture of Commorragh, or the economy of pain or the fall, or the God-shaped hole in the warp that they feed with harvested suffering to stay on the right side of their own damnation. All of that is real. All of that is true. All of that has been documented, in fragments, by survivors who returned, and by scholars who studied the returning survivors, and by soldiers who faced them across battlefields and lived to file reports. None of it is the thing I mean. The thing I mean is this: every account of the Drukhari that the Imperium produces, every ministorum sermon, every inquisitorial briefing, every piece of scripture that addresses what they are and what they do and what it means, every account treats them as a thing that happens to people, an event, a force, something that arrives and does what it does and departs and leaves behind evidence of itself in the people it touched, the same way a storm leaves evidence of itself in the landscape it passed through. The people who survive them are understood as survivors of a storm, marked by it, damaged by it, but fundamentally still the people they were before the storm, now carrying the marks. This is wrong. Not wrong in the way that incomplete information is wrong. Missing facts, insufficient data, conclusions that would be revised if more evidence were available. Wrong in a structural way. Wrong in the way that an argument is wrong when it begins from an incorrect premise, so that no matter how rigorous the logic that follows, the conclusion cannot be correct because the foundation cannot support it.
The premise that is wrong is this: that the Drukhari are something that happens to you.
They are not. They are something that happens inside you, and they do it slowly, and they do it without your awareness. And by the time you understand what has been happening, the happening has been going on long enough that the question of whether you are the same person who walked in is no longer a question you can answer from the inside, because the inside is what changed. I want to build this argument carefully, because I have been building it for 6 years, and I want it to be correct. The Drukhari, as I have now understood them from inside their civilization, from inside their city, from inside 6 years of proximity to one of them who was more interested in the quality of my interiority than in its destruction. The Drukhari are the only civilization in the galaxy that has looked at the question of what a conscious being is and answered it honestly. Not kindly. Honestly. Every other civilization, the Imperium, the Tau with their greater good, the Eldari craft worlds with their path system and their controlled emotional architecture, every species that has built something durable enough to call a civilization. Every one of them has answered the question of what a conscious being is by saying, it is the thing we protect. The self, the soul, the psyche, the individual. These are the sacred objects, the thing the civilization organizes itself around preserving. The entire moral architecture of every functioning society I know of is built on the premise that the interior of a person is inviolable, that what you are on the inside is yours, that no external force has the right to reach in and rearrange it. The Drukhari looked at that premise and they discarded it, not because they are evil, not because they are broken, because they are honest, because they looked at what conscious beings actually do to each other across the full span of history, the wars, the hierarchies, the specific and endless ways that civilizations extract what they need from the people inside them. And they said, the interiority is not inviolable. It never has been. Every civilization reaches into its people and takes what it needs and calls the taking something else, dresses it in the vocabulary of duty or faith or the greater good or the Emperor's will, and the dressing is the lie, and the taking is the truth. The Drukhari do not dress it. Visereth told me in year 5, on the 39th visit, not the most important visit, not the one I have described to you, but one I return to with a frequency that tells me it did something to the way I think that I have not finished accounting for. She told me that the Drukhari concept she found most difficult to translate into terms a human could hold was the concept they used for what they do to their slaves. Not the word for slave, not the word for the suffering they harvest, the word for the process, the word for what it means to take the experience of a conscious being and convert it into something that sustains you. She said, the closest equivalent in your language would be the word you use for eating. But eating implies that the food is consumed, that the source is finished and discarded. Our word implies something more continuous, something that persists in the source, something that the source continues to provide because the source continues to exist. She said, the most precise translation, if you insist on one, would be the word you use for tending, as in a garden. I said, you tend us. She said, we tend what we need. I sat with that for a long time. I am still sitting with it. Because here is the thing that the word tending does to the account I have been giving you. If what she did to me across 6 years was tending, maintaining the specific conditions that kept the source productive, keeping the intactness intact because the intactness was the resource, adjusting the temperature and the light and the quality of the water and the 44 visits to produce the optimal conditions for continued yield, then the account of what happened in that room is not the account I have been giving you. The account I have been giving you has a shape. It is the shape of a person in an impossible situation who found, against the odds, against the arithmetic of this place, a form of genuine connection with the entity that held him there. Asymmetrical, compromised, structurally contaminated by every power differential available, but real. Real in the only way that matters, which is that it happened, and it changed the person it happened to. And the change was not only damage. The account that the word tending produces is a different shape. It is the shape of a gardener and a garden, of a thing that is kept and a thing that keeps it, of conditions managed and resources maintained and yields harvested across a carefully tended span of time, of a scribe from an agri-world. An agri-world. I want you to understand the specific precision of that irony. I want you to understand that she would have understood it, that she would have found it elegant. A scribe from a world that existed to grow food for other worlds, now providing a different kind of sustenance for a different kind of hunger. The gardener keeps the garden because the garden produces what the gardener needs.
That is not cruelty. That is agriculture.
I know which account is more accurate. I am still in the chair. I have been in the chair for what I estimate is 2 hours since Sireth's last visit, since the information that she has not responded, and I have been doing what I have been doing for 6 years, which is thinking, using the specific and unglamorous machinery of a mind trained to notice discrepancies and find the true figure underneath the presented one. And here is what the true figure says. Both accounts are accurate. This is the thing that Commorragh does. This is the thing I promised to tell you. The thing no account reaches. The thing only available from inside a sufficient span of time, inside this place, with this level of proximity to what it actually is. Commorragh does not resolve the contradiction. It installs it. It reaches into you, slowly, incrementally, through 6 years of wrong-colored light and water that is too good, and 44 visits, and the specific and irreplaceable experience of being known by something that is using the knowing. And it places inside you a contradiction that you cannot resolve and cannot discard. A contradiction that you will carry, that you are carrying now, as you listen to me, because I have been placing it in you across 5 chapters with the same patient incrementalism that she placed in me across 6 years. I want you to notice that. I want you to notice that you have been in this room with me, that you have been sitting in the chair across from mine, receiving what I offered, receiving the account of the 44 visits, and the word tending, and the question that does not resolve, and the portrait of a civilization that is honest in the way that no civilization has the courage to be. I want you to notice what the hours of sitting in that chair have done to the clean, categorical revulsion you arrived with. Did you arrive with clean, categorical revulsion? You should have. Do you still have it? Be honest. Be honest with me in the specific way that this room has, over time, required me to be honest. Not the honesty of confession, not the honesty of a person performing their own transparency, but the honesty of looking directly at what is true and not flinching from it, and not dressing it and saying, here is the true figure. Here is what the column actually says. Here is what the column says. You have been listening to a person describe his relationship with his captor for 5 chapters, and the relationship is real. And the captor is a Drukhari archon who was using him as a source of harvested experience to counteract the dulling of her own. And both things are simultaneously and completely true, and you cannot resolve them. And I am not going to resolve them for you, because the resolution is not available. Because the resolution was never the point. The point is the contradiction. The point is that you are now carrying it. Welcome. I want to tell you about the Imperium now. One final time. I was born in it. I served it for 31 years with the unreflective loyalty of a person who has never had cause to examine the foundations of the thing they live inside. I catalogued its discrepancies, and I met its tithes, and I did my function within it. And I believed, not passionately, not with the burning faith of a ministorum priest, but in the quiet ambient way that you believe in the air you breathe. I believed it was good, that its enormity was justified, that the 10,000 years of war and sacrifice and the grinding consumption of ordinary human lives that keeps it running was the necessary cost of the only alternative to something worse. I still believe that. I want to be clear about that. I have not arrived in Commorragh and looked at the Drukhari and decided that the comparison exonerates them or condemns the Imperium, or that the two things cancel each other out, in some moral accounting that leaves me free of the obligation to prefer one over the other. The Imperium is preferable. The Imperium is worth returning to, if return were available, if the door opened, and the Thunderhawk came down through the sky. But I no longer believe the Imperium is good in the way I believed it before. I believe it is necessary. I believe it is the least bad available option in a galaxy that is actively, consistently, and with an impressive variety, trying to end the human species. I believe it does what it does because the alternative is worse, and it knows the alternative is worse, and the knowledge is old and well evidenced, and the people who run it are not wrong about the nature of the threat. I just know now that necessary and good are not the same word, that I used them as the same word for 31 years without noticing, that the Imperium uses them as the same word deliberately, not maliciously, not as a conspiracy, but as an institutional reflex, the same reflex that makes every large system describe its requirements as its virtues and its extractions as its gifts. The Drukhari do not call their extractions gifts. This does not make the extractions acceptable, but it makes the honesty of them, the specific, brutal, unadorned honesty of a civilization that has looked at what it is and chosen it completely. It makes that honesty something I cannot unknow. And I can feel in the architecture of my thinking, in the specific way this knowledge sits in the structure of how I now approach questions, I can feel what knowing it has cost me, what it has changed, what it has made impossible to reassemble in the form it had before. That is what Commorragh does. not to your body, not to your mind, not in the direct sense of damage or dissolution or the grinding replacement that Sireth described as the standard fate of long-term captives. It does it to the framework, to the set of unexamined premises that you stand on when you think, the floor beneath the thinking that you never look at, because you never need to, because the floor has always held. It removes the floor, and you are still standing, and you are still you, still Aldric, still the person who noticed the faulty coupling in the supply manifest, still the person who arrived here with the specific unglamorous machinery of a mind that notices things. You are still all of that. You are just standing in the air now, and you have been standing in the air long enough that it no longer feels like falling. And that is the most frightening sentence I have said to you across 5 chapters. And I mean it completely. I want to tell you what I think about when I think about whether she is coming back. Not what I hope, not what I fear, what I think, the cold analytical assessment, the discrepancy detection applied to the available data, the truest figure I can produce from the evidence in front of me. The evidence says this: she kept me alive for 6 years against the arithmetic of this place. She kept Sireth at a distance for 4 years. She came 44 times and asked questions that moved in a progression, and the progression ended at the 44th visit, at the smile, at the sentence about the gathering. The progression ending does not mean the project ended. It means a phase completed. Projects that take 6 years do not end because a phase completes. They move to the next phase. The non-response to Sireth's transfer request is data. She has not said no. She has also not said yes. In Commorragh, where every interaction is a transaction and every transaction is conducted at the speed of advantage, a deliberate non-response from an archon of her standing is not an oversight. It is a choice. It is in the vocabulary of a political environment I have had 6 years to study at a closer range than any Imperial intelligence analyst has ever achieved. A specific kind of message. It says, not yet, not never, not this is refused, not Sireth may proceed, not yet implied yet. A point at which the answer changes. A timeline she is managing, toward an outcome she has not disclosed, on a schedule I do not have access to. This is the most honest assessment I can produce. She is not gone. She is somewhere in Commorragh, at a gathering that may or may not have concluded, with a message from a homunculus sitting unanswered in whatever serves as her correspondence. And she is, I believe this, I am choosing to believe this, with the full and clear-eyed awareness that choosing to believe it tells me something about what 6 years has done to me. She is thinking about the not yet. I am choosing to believe this. I want you to understand both parts of that sentence equally. I am choosing. This is a decision made with available information, under conditions that compromise my objectivity in ways I have named to you directly. I believe. This is not certain. It is not evidence. It is the specific and unglamorous act of a person deciding what to do with the absence of evidence, which is the decision that defines more of human existence than any of us is comfortable acknowledging. I am choosing to believe she is coming back. I know what that says about me. I know what 6 years of tending produces in the thing being tended. I know that the gardener keeps the garden, and the garden, over time, orients toward the gardener the way plants orient toward light. Not because the light loves the plant, but because the light is the light and the plant is what it is, and orientation is the natural consequence of sustained proximity. I know this. I have named it to you. I have named it to myself. I am still orienting. The last thing I want to tell you is small. It is not a revelation. It is not the final turn of an argument, or the thesis toward which 5 chapters have been building. It is simply the true thing that is present in this room, right now, in this cycle, in the chair with the wrong-colored light, and the city sounding outside the window, and Sireth somewhere in this building, with his patience that he has told me is not inexhaustible, and his transfer request that has not been refused, and his interest in the interior of the thing that survival is made of. The true thing is this: I do not know if I will be in this chair in 6 more cycles. I do not know if Visereth's non-response will remain a non-response long enough to matter. I do not know if she is returning because she has decided the project has a next phase, or because something has concluded and the asset is no longer required, and the clean and efficient logic of Commorragh will process it accordingly. I do not know if Sireth will be granted access. I do not know what access would mean in the specific and careful vocabulary he uses for the thing he intends, and I have been choosing not to think too precisely about what it would mean, because the precision is not available to me yet, and anticipating the unavailable is a form of suffering I declined to engage with some years ago. I do not know any of these things. What I know is that I am still here. I am still, identifiably, Aldric. The architecture is intact. Sireth told me so with the confidence of someone whose expertise I have no basis to challenge. The floor is gone, but I am still standing. The framework has been changed, but the thing that uses the framework is continuous with the thing that arrived here 6 years ago with soft hands and a stack of Form 7 Gamma on his desk. That continuity is either the proof that something in me resisted what this place does, or it is the proof that this place does not always need to destroy what it finds, that some things it keeps, that kept things are not the same as saved things, but they are not the same as lost things either, that there is a category between those two that does not have a name in any language I know, and that I have been living in for 6 years. I live there still. I am still here. And here is the sentence I told you I would say. The word for the thing I feel when I think about her not returning is grief, not loss, not the fear of what comes next if she does not return, not the strategic assessment of my survival prospects in the absence of her protection, not the cold calculation of what Sireth's patience means for a timeline. Those things are present. They are real, and I am tracking them. But underneath them, in the part of the private record that I have maintained as the last honest place in 6 years of careful self-management, underneath all of it is grief. The grief of a person who found something real in an impossible place and is not certain whether the finding survives the knowing of what it cost, and is not certain whether the uncertainty voids the finding, and is not certain of anything except that the something was real while it was happening, and the happening is not available to be revised. I grieve it. I grieve it knowing what I know. I grieve it knowing that I was a source, and the knowing does not change the grief, and the grief does not change the knowing, and both are present simultaneously in the same person, in the same chair, and will remain present simultaneously for as long as that person is in any chair anywhere. That is what interesting costs. Not your body, not your mind in the ways you can name and account for, and carry with the dignity of a wound that has a clear origin. It costs the cleanliness, the ability to look at your own experience and know with certainty what it was and what it meant and how to carry it. It takes the story you would tell about what happened to you, and it makes the story permanently, structurally, irresolvably 2 stories at once, and you carry both, and neither cancels the other, and you are still here, and the lamp is still slightly wrong in color, and the city still sounds the way it sounds, and in the next cycle, Isin will bring water, and I will know from the way she sets the tray down whether there is any word, and I will read her posture with the fluency I have developed across 6 years of necessary attention, and the reading will tell me something, and that something will tell me something else, and I will sit with what it tells me, and I will think about it carefully, and I will still be here when the thinking is done, still here, still Aldric, still, and this is the last word, the true word, The word that all 5 chapters have been the long way around to. Still interested. In the question. On the next visit. In the thing that comes next, whatever it is. In whatever form it arrives, at whatever cost. Still oriented toward the light. God, Emperor, forgive me. I am still oriented toward the light. This story does not end here. It does not end because the people inside it are still inside it, and the city does not stop, and the lamp will be slightly wrong in color for as long as the lamp is on. What happens next? Whether she returns, whether the transfer is refused, whether the next phase of a 6-year project begins or concludes, none of that is available to you. It is only available to Aldric. And Aldric is in the chair, and the chair is in Commorragh, and Commorragh is the city that chose itself completely. And the choosing once made does not unmake. It just continues. It just continues.